Hi friends, welcome back. Today we are back to working on our underwater canvas, and as you can see, this is as far as we're going to make it in this video. So I've decided to do this video series as fully real time, so I'm not going to speed anything up. I'm going to show you exactly how long it takes to do all the steps that we're going to do for this entire painting, and it's going to be real fun. So let me show you how we got from the last video to this. Let's get started. Essentially, the point of this series is to really get to show you guys exactly how long it takes to do a painting of this size in a style that I guess I don't do very often. I mean, it's not that it's a different style, but it's a different kind of setting. And unlike the painting that I showed you last time that I did in less than 2 hours, this one is taking a fair bit of time to do, and I haven't really taken the time to show you guys real time what it looks like to paint something like this. So none of the videos that you'll see in this series are sped up at all. I am breaking it down pretty far, so it'll get a little more granular than some of my other videos do, because honestly, if I was doing a normal video where I was speeding it up, I probably wouldn't have shown you this portion at all, because this is just me going over that base coat with basically the exact same colors and just setting in stone what that background is actually going to look like. So essentially, what we worked on last time was just getting the gist of the background down on the canvas, which we talked about in the last video for this series. But this time I am taking those same colors and really refining the way that this looks. So I'm working really hard to make it look like underwater, to make it look smooth and consistent, and to have a really soft and gentle gradient that makes sense for it being an underwater painting. And again, because I'm doing this in real time, you'll see me stop a lot to pick up my tubes of paint and put more paint on my palette. I am trying to be a little more conservative with my paint, so I'm not getting as much out at a time, purely because it dries out really fast and I want to not be wasteful with my resources. So if I get a paint out and I put it on my palette, I want to make sure that I use either all of it or nearly all of it. So for a painting like this, where I'm working with 1, 2, 3, 4 different colors, I am going section by section and getting out the exact colors that I need, mixing it into the shade that I need, and then adding it bit by bit. Because it is an underwater scene, it does make it a little bit easier to kind of go back and forth with your colors and not have it be as flat, which I guess you can do it this way with not underwater scenes, and you can do really fun little gradient looks like this, but this isn't generally the technique that I use for a above ground painting, I guess. Above sea, above the water, I don't know what you call it, land. So I'm not necessarily going for the smoothest gradient ever. You'll even see that with the undercoat that we already did in the last painting. I don't necessarily want it to be to where you really can't tell where the transition lines are. I think for an underwater scene, it makes a little bit more sense for it to be visible, that there is a visible transition from dark into light, especially because I'm going to have some coral reef components here. It makes sense to have the bottom area be darker and then to have kind of patchy sections of darker water where probably what you're seeing is in the distance there is something there underwater. So it would be like you can see the coral that's closer to you, but the farther away you get, the less you can really make out what you're seeing. So there would be sections of like, it's a little bit darker over there, so maybe there's a hill underwater or something like that. And because of that, I'm not trying to make it a super smooth, crisp gradient. If I was just doing underwater but not coral reef, like in the middle of the ocean but kind of close to the surface of the ocean, I would do more of a flat color with a little bit of a gradient, and I would try to smooth that gradient as much as I possibly could to make sure that you couldn't really see it. So it does vary depending on what exactly you're painting, obviously. But for this one, I was trying to have something of a gradient, but also keep it intentionally a little bit patchy, which honestly was pretty tricky to do. And then you might notice me yammering on in the actual video portion of this rather than the voiceover. And that's because I was doing this while I was on the phone, which I don't generally recommend trying to do two things at once like that, but I had been on a phone call, it was going a little bit long, and so I just decided to keep painting while I was on the phone. I will say I did lose my train of thought right after I said I will say. I'm going to be perfectly honest with you guys. And because I'm also doing this where I'm doing voiceover after the fact and the video is supposed to be more real time, I'm also trying to not cut out when I forget what I'm talking about in the voiceover portion of this so that you can really see exactly what's going on in the mind of the Rani. I don't know. I thought this would be fun. So here we are. So I am using, just for your reference, in case you wanted to know, I'm using white, aqua green, peacock blue, and cypress to do this whole background. So the top is white and aqua green. In the middle, I've got white, aqua green, and peacock. And then the most dark sections at the bottom have a little bit of cypress in there. I will add more cypress as we go on with this video. You'll see it when it comes out. But so what we're working on in this session is just getting the background to be exactly what it needs to be for us to move forward and start adding more colors. So essentially, this entire video, those are the 4 colors I'm using. I'm not going to open up any other tubes of paint. It's just going to be those 4 colors, kind of going back and forth in tones, and I will mix them to be different shades, different tones, different hues, depending on what section of the painting I'm working on. And I think it is really fun to see exactly how much you can do on a canvas without using very many colors. Again, I don't like to have to mix all of my colors, so a lot of artists will get just your base colors and then they would mix to an aqua green and something like a peacock blue and something like the cypress. I prefer to just buy the paints at those pre-mixed colors and then be able to take those pre-mixed colors and mix them however I want to kind of to tweak the color a little bit here and there, just however is needed. I think that that is just an easier way to do it, and it just makes more sense for me. So really what you're going to see here is a game of how much depth can we get with only using 4 tubes of paint, which I always think is really fun. Sometimes I like to challenge myself by doing stuff like this. My intention with this one was not to only use these 4 colors. I think that I thought it was going to be a little bit faster, so I had every intention of getting a little farther than where we're going to get in this video, in this session, but that did mean that it turned into a kind of cool thing where I'm only using 4 different paint tubes. And usually when that happens, it's more of a thing where I've decided, hey, let's make this a fun challenge, and here's the paint you get to use, and you don't get to use anything else. And that can be a really fun challenge to play with when you know that you're doing it. And then other times you just are working with 4 tubes of paint, and because you're doing an underwater painting, you don't need to add any other colors. And then you've painted for 35-40 minutes and you've only used those colors. And then when you go back and edit it and you're doing the voiceover, you realize that you really only used 4 colors, and hey, that's kind of cool. So it's one of the fun things that you can discover in being an artist, is that paintings where you think you're going to need a whole lot of different paint colors, you actually only end up using 4. So that's always really fun for me to see. I am trying to keep better track of what paint colors I am using, so that if you guys ever do want to know what colors I'm using for any of my paintings, I would be happy to tell you. A lot of the time I do pick my colors kind of on the fly. So while I have a pile of paint colors that I've picked out via the color cubes, I don't necessarily know which one went where. And because I will use pre-mixed colors and mix them together, I can't always tell you what exactly I used where to get any given color all the time. Some of them I do often enough that I just know what they do. Like Viridian Green mixed with quinacridone magenta makes a beautiful lavender that I love working with. That's the main one that I can think of off the top of my head. But just doing the different color mixes is really fun, and I am trying to keep track of what colors are going where and what colors I am mixing together to make shades that I really like, because I have been pretty bad about keeping track of it, and that has meant that there are colors that I've mixed to that I don't really know how I got there. And sure, if I did more color theory training, I would probably get better at this and it wouldn't be an issue, but honestly, color theory is really hard. And some of it makes perfect sense and other bits just don't. So I stick with the bits that make sense, if I'm being perfectly honest. I intuitively know a decent amount of color theory, and then because I used pre-mixed paint colors, I kind of skip a few steps. And I think that's fine. I don't think that as an artist anymore, you are really required to know the ins and outs of color theory the way that you used to, because now if you are trying to get to a certain color and you know what that color is, like you know what the name of the color is, you can look up how to mix to it. And somebody else will have already done the work, and you don't have to go through years of study to figure out how to mix to every single color. Someone's already done the work and it's super easy to find it. That's not to say that you shouldn't learn color theory if you're going to be an artist. I essentially got to the point that I had learned what I needed, and I think that happens to a lot of artists. I think a lot of artists end up learning more color theory than is strictly necessary, and I have seen a lot of artists get crippled by doing the study of color theory, and I didn't want that to happen to me, and I could very easily see that happening to me. So I do dabble in some color theory. I do like to watch YouTube videos on color theory, but I have never done classes on it like other people have. And I think that's fine. I don't think there's a problem with that at all. So now at this point in the painting, I am starting on the coral reef. So essentially I am using a small filbert brush, and I'm just tapping some color in to make the suggestion of where the coral reef is actually going to be. So again, like I said, we're not actually going to get to the coral part today, but we're going to get to some of these suggestions of coral. And I do have all my reference photos set for the next session. And in the next session, we're going to start putting a bunch of color down. So it's going to be extra fun and extra dramatic. This one I feel like it's a pretty chill view on the early part of a painting, which I think is fun. I love this phase. I love this bit where it doesn't look like anything yet, because it's so fun to take it from this background of nothing into a beautiful painting. So again, I'm just taking those same colors. I have a very loose mix on my palette, which means I haven't actually mixed the colors together. I am dipping my brush a little bit in one color, a little bit in another color, and maybe a little bit in another color. And then I'm just tapping it in where I want the rocks to be, basically. And then on these rocks in a future video, we will be adding corals. I like doing it like this, where I don't fully mix a color, because it automatically adds the suggestion of light and dark, and it adds a lot of depth without having to do an extensive amount of effort. Again, I am all for using your brushes and your colors in an easy way to give you a lot of detail and a lot of depth. So this little tapping motion and not fully mixing your colors in, it gives you a really beautiful effect on the canvas. So if you remember from last video, I had that little sketch down, and at this point I have fully covered that sketch. So I'm having to try to remember exactly how I wanted this to be, and I do remember that I had two high spots on the sides where I was going to have different corals. So I'm making something similar but not the exact same shape, using the same colors and using the same brush technique to add a similar little rock on the other side of the canvas. Again, we try to work with rules of symmetry v asymmetry. So like the rule of thirds is generally one of the better ones when you are working with paintings or photography or anything like that. I like to have a level of symmetry and a level of asymmetry. I don't like when the whole canvas is filled with stuff a lot of the time. I tend to prefer where a third of the canvas has the majority of the things that are going to draw your eye. I think that tends to be much more beautiful and much more interesting, and just a little bit easier to get sucked into, if that makes sense. A canvas that has a lot on it can be really overwhelming to look at and doesn't necessarily hold the eye in the way that I appreciate. Personally, I like a canvas, a painting that has detail on it and that is not jam-packed with stuff. I don't want a painting that is insanely busy. I want there to be a few things, a few focal points, a few things that are going to draw my eye and keep my attention and keep me sucked in. But I don't want to be overwhelmed by the amount of stuff on a canvas. And again, you can achieve that by working with similar colors. So, like we'd already talked about, this painting has 4 colors on it at this point, and that does make it a little easier on the eye because there's not a lot of stuff that is going to be overwhelming and be, I don't want to say stressful, but that's the only word I can think of off the top of my head aside from overwhelming. It can be a little bit stressful if there's a lot of stuff and a lot of color and a lot of not necessarily clashing things, but a lot of detail and a lot of different things and a lot of variety. It can get a little bit stressful to look at. And I like for my paintings to be something that brings joy and something that brings peace. I don't want people to look at my paintings and get stressed or get overwhelmed or be confused. I really want when you look at one of my paintings for you to just kind of go, I like that. I like evoking that feeling when I'm painting. So working with color like this, working with symmetry versus asymmetry, you can you'll see that when you look at a lot of my paintings that I do try to not do too much on the canvas because I don't want it to be busy. I don't want it to be overwhelming, and I want you to be at peace when you're looking at it. I want it to be something that brings peace to you. Because again, that's what I want when I'm looking at art. And I think that the best thing that you can do as an artist is to paint for yourself, not for others. Obviously, this is not the case when you're doing commissions, but your personal art should be your style. It should be what makes you happy. It should be the kind of thing that you like to look at, because then there's something of you that is automatically baked into everything that you create. And I think that makes it really special, and it makes every piece of art done by any given artist really unique to that artist. Because even if they're doing a similar style to another artist, they're going to be unique because what they were painting was for them and not for that other artist, if that makes any sense. Back to my painting. At this point, we are working on some kind of corally shapes, some kind of suggestions of coral that are in the background. I may, in the next session, add a little bit of color to these, but essentially I wanted there to be basically the shadow of some other shapes and some other corals that are a little farther back in the background. Had I thought of it, I probably would have painted these in before I did the rocks that were the closest to the foreground, but I didn't, so I'm making it work by doing it like this. And there's nothing wrong with that. Sometimes you get an idea partway through and it kind of changes what you have in front of that, but there is nothing wrong with having to add more paint on top of something you already painted. There's nothing wrong with having to kind of undo and then redo something that you already painted. It happens, it's fine. And a lot of the time, I think having to redo something often means that the redo will be better than the original do. So I'm just mixing mostly peacock blue with a little bit of the aqua green, and occasionally a touch of cypress, just to do kind of suggestions, just ideas. I did look up a bunch of different coral shapes, and I'm using those as a reference and kind of a little bit of a guide as to how I want these essentially shadows to look. And I think they came out really nicely. I am pretty darn happy with how that looks. I think that it came out, you can tell that we're underwater, essentially, is how I'm feeling at this point looking at this canvas. This looks like underwater. The level of muted color is very underwater. There's that quality of light that you really only get in an underwater scene, where you can see things, but unlike when you're on land and you can see for miles and miles and miles, when you're underwater, especially in like a murky reef, you can't necessarily see very far. So I'm going to have coral, obviously, but because the water's a little bit murky, some of that coral would be a more muted color when we get there, because again, the water is murky, you can't see very far. And I think that's just it's a really fun thing to represent in a painting. And like I've talked about before, I really haven't played with this in the past. So this is really fun for me to get to kind of explore color values underwater. I don't know how to swim. I lived in desert. I can't swim. I never really attempted to. I attempted to learn, and it was not pretty, so I quit. And I really wish that I hadn't. I wish that I had stuck it out and really learned to swim, because I love underwater scenes. I love coral reefs. I love the idea of going snorkeling or going scuba diving or any of that. I love it. It sounds like so much fun. And I don't know how to swim. And I tried to learn and it didn't go well. So I kind of feel like that's not something I'm ever really going to get to do. So my only option that I have is to watch movies, watch videos, paint scenes, look at pictures, and try to create something that matches this vision in my head of how cool it would be to be underwater. And I don't know, I just think there's something really magical about underwater scenes that have always intrigued me. And so that was a big reason of why this year I really, really wanted to do an underwater scene. It's really the primary reason why I made this a goal for this year, that I wanted to do this painting, because I've been wanting to do more underwater stuff for ages. I've done a few jellyfish paintings, but it's literally just a basic background and a jellyfish. And I really wanted to do a full scene. I wanted to do something different than what I've done in the past, and something that would really resonate with me. and therefore hopefully would really resonate with all of you as well. Because again, you're painting art for yourself in that you want to paint stuff that you love and a style that you love. But you're also painting for others in that ideally you want to paint things or create things in general that other people also find beautiful and that other people also enjoy, so that you can bring that sense of, in my case, joy or peace or that sigh of contentedness to someone else. That is the goal. And I don't know. I hope that you guys are really liking this one, because I'm really liking this one. At this point, I have basically finished that lower section with the rocks and the suggestions of coral in the background, and a trick that I have learned, and I don't know why this helps, but it does. I will take a picture of my canvas and then I will look at it on my phone, and for some reason, looking at it on my phone, I have an easier time seeing what's not working than if I just look at the canvas. So I had taken a picture of it and everything seemed too straight across. So I decided to, for the background colors, to bring up the two sides a little bit so it has that little bit of a curve to it, because it seemed how it was so straight across that pseudo gradient that it looked too intentional, if that makes sense. It looked man-made. It was too perfect, and it needed to have something, it needed to be less perfect. So I got the peacock blue, the aqua green, and the white back out, and I just added a little bit, and I just added that little curve up on the two sides. And then I decided to do a little bit more with adding that depth in there, adding the little sections where there's a little bit of a darker color, a little bit of a suggestion of there's something else back here. Maybe there's a rock, maybe there's some underwater cliffs over there. I don't know. There's something. We'll get there in the next videos, I'm sure. But just adding that little curve up on the two sides just really made this background. I'm so much happier with it after just doing that tiny little tweak that took, an additional 5 minutes to do all of this. It just made it come alive somehow, and I don't know if that's really well captured in this video, but in person it looked a little flat. So I took that picture of it and I looked at it, and I could just immediately tell what was wrong and what I needed to do to fix it. And it was really funny and kind of exciting to just be able to do those two little curves up and then look at it, take a new picture of it, and go, oh yeah, that was it. That's all it needed. I think as an artist that never really gets old, where you just look at a painting, immediately know what's wrong and immediately know how to fix it, and then have the fix be super easy. It's so satisfying, and it's really gratifying. It makes you feel like you know what you're doing, which realistically, all of us love that feeling. So I wouldn't expect it to be any different for anybody else than it is for artists. It's a really good feeling when you do a thing that you know is going to make something better, and then it just immediately does what you needed it to do. I love it. So anyway, that's about as far as we're going to make it in this video. Next time we will have some more colors on here. We'll work on some corals and it'll be a lot of fun. I hope that you guys enjoyed this one and liked getting to see how I do a painting from start to finish. Thanks, guys. Bye. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more chill videos with art.